This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
In 1805, Napoleon's French Empire cast a long shadow across Europe, its tendrils stretching far and wide. This expansion prompted Russia and Austria to forge an alliance against the growing threat, setting the stage for a clash of empires. The crisp autumn air in Moscow carried whispers of change, but life in the city continued with its usual vibrancy. In the Rostov household, excitement buzzed like a swarm of bees. Servants darted to and fro, their footsteps echoing through the grand halls as they prepared for a celebration fit for royalty. Count Ilya Rostov, a man whose jovial nature matched his love for extravagance, stood in the center of the whirlwind. His booming laugh cut through the chaos as he oversaw the preparations for his wife's name day festivities. The aroma of roasting meats and sweet pastries wafted through the air, making mouths water and stomachs growl in anticipation. Amidst this flurry of activity, Natasha Rostova, the Count's youngest daughter, twirled in her new dress. Her laughter, light and musical, seemed to make the very air around her sparkle. Natasha's eyes shone with the innocence of youth, drawing everyone into her orbit like moths to a flame. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit study across town, Prince Andrei Bolkonsky sat hunched over his desk. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across his handsome face, etched with lines of discontent. The weight of his marriage to the pregnant Lisa hung heavy on his shoulders, like a cloak he longed to shed. With a decisive stroke of his pen, Andrei made his choice. The scratch of quill on paper seemed to echo his inner turmoil as he penned his decision to join the army. In that moment, the study felt like a cage, and the promise of war offered an escape. As Andrei prepared for his departure, his wife Lisa wept silently in their bedchamber. Her delicate frame shook with each sob, hands cradling her swollen belly, as if to protect the child from the harsh reality of its father's decision. The soft candlelight caught the tears on her cheeks, turning them into glistening diamonds of sorrow. In the quiet corners of Bald Hills, the Bolkonsky family estate, Maria, Andrei's sister, found solace in her devotions. Her gentle spirit was a stark contrast to the harsh demeanor of her father, Prince Nikolai Bolkonsky. Maria moved through the halls like a ghost, her soft prayers a counterpoint to the gruff commands of the old prince that echoed off the stone walls. The scene shifted to the glittering world of St. Petersburg, where Pierre Bezukhov stumbled into high society like a bear in a china shop. Fresh from his education abroad, Pierre's eyes were wide with wonder and naivety. His ill-fitting clothes and unkempt appearance stood out among the polished aristocrats like a dandelion in a bed of roses. At a lavish soiree, the candlelight danced off crystal glasses and gilded mirrors, creating a dazzling display of wealth and opulence. Pierre found himself ensnared in the web of the Kuragin family. Helene Kuragina, a vision of beauty and cunning, circled Pierre like a predator sizing up its prey. Her brother Anatole, equally charming and devious, watched from the shadows, his eyes glinting with mischief as he plotted their next move in the game of power and influence. It was here that Pierre's path crossed with Prince Andrei's. Their eyes met across the crowded room, a spark of recognition igniting between them. Despite their differences, Pierre's disheveled enthusiasm and Andrei's polished cynicism, they found common ground in their intellectual pursuits and shared disillusionment with the superficiality of their peers. As the night wore on, their conversation deepened, touching on philosophy, politics, and the meaning of life. The chatter and music of the party faded into the background as they spoke, creating a bubble of authenticity in a sea of pretense. In another corner of the social whirlwind, young Boris Drubetskoy navigated the treacherous waters of ambition. Guided by his mother Anna Mikhailovna's relentless drive, Boris charmed his way through the ranks of both army and society. His calculated smiles and carefully chosen words were like moves on a chessboard, each designed to advance his position. Boris's path soon intersected with Natasha Rostova's. Her innocence and vivacity caught his eye, like a bright flower in a field of weeds. Natasha, in turn, was drawn to Boris's worldly manner and gentle attentions. Their youthful infatuation blossomed, a tender shoot in the harsh landscape of adult ambitions. As the night drew to a close, The lives of these characters intertwined like threads in a tapestry, each adding their own color and texture to the grand design. The air hummed with tension, the distant drums of war growing ever louder. In drawing rooms and army camps, on grand estates and city streets, the characters of this epic tale pursued their dreams and desires, unaware of the storms gathering on the horizon. Their world stood on the brink of transformation, poised between the old order and the new, as the winds of change swept across Europe. The seeds of conflict and the promise of glory hung in the air like a mist, waiting to be dispersed by the march of armies. As dawn broke over the Russian countryside, a new chapter was about to unfold. The Russian army, under the command of the cautious General Mikhail Kutuzov, began to stir. Soldiers roused from their camps, the clang of weapons and the snort of horses filling the air. The first rays of sunlight glinted off polished bayonets as the army prepared to march westward. Their mission was clear, their resolve unshakable. But as they set out to join their Austrian allies against Napoleon's formidable forces, one question lingered in every soldier's mind. Would they return as heroes or martyrs? The Russian army, under the command of the cautious General Mikhail Kutuzov, marches westward through the autumn countryside. Their mission is clear: to join their Austrian allies against Napoleon's formidable forces. A sea of soldiers stretches as far as the eye can see, their boots churning the earth into a muddy slurry. Prince Andrei rides alongside General Kutuzov, his keen eyes scanning the endless columns of men. The crisp air bites at his cheeks, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. It's a stark contrast to the stuffy war rooms he'd left behind in St. Petersburg, but not the glorious adventure he'd imagined. Andrei's jaw clenches as he watches a supply wagon struggle through the muck. Another day, another delay, he mutters, frustration bubbling in his chest. The inefficiency of it all makes his blood boil. He longs for the clash of steel, the roar of cannons, anything to prove his worth beyond shuffling papers and relaying orders. As they approach Austerlitz in Moravia, the air grows thick with tension. It settles on Andrei's shoulders like a heavy cloak, making each breath feel labored. In a large tent lit by flickering lanterns, Russian and Austrian commanders huddle over maps, their voices rising and falling like waves crashing against a cliff. "We must strike now while Napoleon is weak," an Austrian general insists, his mustache quivering with each word. His face is flushed, eyes wild with a mix of fear and excitement. Kutuzov's reply comes slow and measured, like honey dripping from a spoon. "Haste is the enemy of victory, my friend. We must choose our moment carefully." His weathered face remains a mask of calm, but Andrei catches a glimmer of concern in the old general's eyes. The eve of battle descends, and Prince Andrei finds himself drawn to a small campfire. There, Captain Tushin, an artillery officer with a face as round and kind as a village priest, entertains a group of soldiers. His eyes sparkle with mischief as he gestures with a half-eaten apple. "You see, lads," Tushin says, his voice warm and rich like mulled wine. "The trick is to remember we're all just men. Even Napoleon puts his britches on one leg at a time." The soldiers chuckle, tension visibly easing from their shoulders. Andrei watches, fascinated by Tushin's ability to inspire courage through simple camaraderie. He feels a pang of envy, wishing he could connect so easily with the men. Miles away, in a lavish tent adorned with imperial eagles, Napoleon hunches over maps like a predator eyeing its prey. His mind whirs with calculations, a sly smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he positions markers representing his troops. "Let them think us weak," he murmurs to his generals, his voice low and dangerous. "When the trap springs, their overconfidence will be their undoing." Dawn breaks on December 2nd, 1805, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. A heavy mist clings to the ground like a shroud, obscuring the true positions of both armies. The air is thick with anticipation, the silence before the storm almost deafening. Suddenly, chaos erupts. The Allies, emboldened by Napoleon's apparent weakness, launch their attack prematurely. The world explodes into a cacophony of sound. The thunder of cannons, the screams of men and horses, the clash of steel on steel. Prince Andrei's heart pounds like a war drum, blood rushing in his ears. Through the smoke and confusion, he sees a standard-bearer fall. Time seems to slow as Andre makes a split-second decision. In a moment of reckless courage, he spurs his horse forward, snatching up the flag. "For Russia!" he cries, his voice nearly lost in the din of battle. Men rally around him, their faces a mix of fear and determination. For a breathless moment, it seems as though they might break through. Andre can almost taste victory, sharp and sweet on his tongue. Then with a deafening roar that shakes the very earth, French artillery opens fire. The world explodes in a hail of smoke and shrapnel. Pain erupts in Andre's chest, white-hot and all-consuming. He falls, the sky above him, spinning in a dizzying whirl of blue. As he lies there, the sounds of battle fading to a distant rumble, a profound sense of peace washes over him. The petty concerns of rank and glory that had consumed him now seem as insignificant as specks of dust. How strange, he thinks, his mind drifting like a leaf on a stream, that I never truly saw the sky until now. The battle rages on, but for Andre, time seems to stand still. He contemplates the vastness above him, feeling both infinitesimally small and part of something greater than himself. The pain in his chest fades to a dull throb, replaced by a curious lightness. As the sun sets on Austerlitz, painting the blood-soaked field in shades of crimson and gold, Napoleon's victory is complete. The Russo-Austrian alliance lies in tatters, broken like the weapons strewn across the battlefield. Among the day's survivors wandering the carnage is Pierre Bezukhov, his idealistic notions of war shattered like glass. He stumbles through the aftermath, his eyes wide with horror. The moans of the wounded and the vacant stares of the dead will haunt his dreams for years to come. Pierre helps a limping soldier to a makeshift field hospital, his mind reeling with questions about the nature of humanity and the terrible cost of ambition. The defeat at Austerlitz marks a turning point, not only in the war against Napoleon, but in the personal journeys of those caught in its wake. As night falls, Pierre collapses against a tree, exhaustion and shock finally overtaking him. He closes his eyes, trying to shut out the horrors he's witnessed, but in that moment of darkness, a messenger approaches, breathless and urgent. "Monsieur Bezukhov," the man pants, "you must return to Moscow immediately. It's about your father." Pierre's eyes snap open, a chill running down his spine. Little did he know that this news would catapult him from the blood-soaked fields of war into a world of wealth and power beyond his wildest dreams or his worst nightmares. Pierre Bezukhov's life changed in an instant. The death of his father had catapulted him to become one of the wealthiest men in Russia, inheriting a vast fortune that would alter the course of his existence. The crisp autumn air in Moscow carried more than just the scent of fallen leaves. It was thick with whispers of Pierre's newfound status. The city seemed to pulse with an electric energy, as if the very cobblestones beneath his feet could sense the shift in his fortunes. Opportunists swarmed like moths to a flame, their eyes glittering with barely concealed greed. Among them, Prince Vasily Kuragin moved with the calculated precision of a predator. His shrewd gaze never left Pierre, assessing and plotting with each step. The weight of Vasily's attention made Pierre's skin crawl, as if ants were marching along his spine. Enter Helene, Vasily's daughter, a vision that could steal the breath from a man's lungs. Her beauty was a weapon, honed to perfection. When she laughed, it was like crystal shattering, sharp and enticing. Pierre found himself drawn to her, even as a voice in the back of his mind screamed caution. Pierre, with his perpetually slipping glasses and gentle demeanor, felt like a bear thrust into a delicate china shop. The opulent ballrooms of Moscow's elite became a maze of social pitfalls, each conversation a potential trap. His kindness, once a source of comfort, now felt like a vulnerability in this world of sharks circling for blood. The pressure mounted, a relentless tide pushing Pierre towards a decision he knew in his heart was wrong. Yet, like a man in a dream, he found himself agreeing to marry Helene. The words left his mouth, and he felt as if he'd signed away a piece of his soul. Their wedding was a spectacle of excess. Chandeliers threw fractured light across the sea of faces, each smile a mask hiding true intentions. As Pierre stood beside his bride, the hollow congratulations grated on his ears like nails on a chalkboard. He felt suffocated, trapped in a gilded cage of his own making. Days bled into weeks, and the facade of marital bliss crumbled like sand. Helene's true nature emerged, cold and calculating. Her eyes lingered on other men, particularly the dashing Fyodor Dolokhov. Each shared glance between them was a knife twisting in Pierre's gut, leaving him gasping for air in a sea of betrayal. Nights found Pierre staring into the depths of his vodka glass, the amber liquid swirling like the thoughts in his mind. The weight of his wealth and status pressed down on him, a smothering blanket threatening to extinguish the last embers of his spirit. Across the city, the Rostov estate groaned under the weight of mounting debts. Count Rostov's generosity, once his crowning virtue, now threatened to be his family's undoing. The specter of poverty loomed large, casting long shadows over once carefree faces. Young Natasha Rostova, blossoming into womanhood, found herself caught in the whirlwind of her first grand ball. The world spun around her in a kaleidoscope of color and sound, her heart beating a frantic rhythm as she tried to keep pace with the complexities of adult relationships. Nikolai Rostov burst through the doors of his family home, his hussar's uniform a splash of vibrant color against the fading grandeur of the estate. His laughter echoed through the halls, a brief respite from the worry that had settled like dust over the household. But fate had other plans. In a smoke-filled room, cards slapped against green baize with the finality of Judgment Day. Nikolai, caught in the throes of gambling fever, faced Dolokhov across the table. The stakes climbed higher with each hand, a mountain of debt growing before his eyes. When the dust settled, Nikolai's recklessness had cost him dearly, the weight of his losses threatening to crush not only him, but his already struggling family. As the wheel of fate spun on, indifferent to the struggles of those caught in its relentless turning, a messenger arrived at the Bolkonsky estate. The air in the grand foyer seemed to thicken, pressing down on Andrei's shoulders as the words echoed in his ears. Lisa, his wife, had died in childbirth. The world around him blurred, the ornate decorations of his ancestral home fading into a haze of grief and shock. The air in the grand foyer seemed to thicken, pressing down on Andrei's shoulders as the words echoed in his ears. Lisa, his wife, had died in childbirth. The world around him blurred, the ornate decorations of his ancestral home fading into a haze of grief and shock. Guilt crashed over him like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in its relentless force. He had left Lise behind, chasing dreams of military glory, and now she was gone forever. The taste of ash filled his mouth as his former ambitions crumbled to dust. Seeking escape from the suffocating weight of his emotions, Andrei fled to his estate, Bogucharovo. The journey was a blur of muted colors and indistinct shapes, his mind too numb to process the passing scenery. As he arrived, the sprawling countryside unfurled before him like a living canvas. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, their gentle slopes a stark contrast to the jagged memories of blood-soaked battlefields that haunted his dreams. The soft rustling of leaves in the breeze and the melodic chirping of birds gradually penetrated the fog of Andrei's grief. He found himself drawn to the rhythms of rural life, the steady turning of soil beneath his hands, offering a tangible connection to the world around him. The scent of freshly tilled earth filled his nostrils, grounding him in the present moment. It was in the tiny hands and innocent eyes of his newborn son, Nikolai, that Andrei discovered an unexpected balm for his wounded soul. The weight of the small bundle in his arms anchored him, giving him a new purpose to cling to amidst the storm of his emotions. As days melted into weeks and weeks into months, Andrei found himself embracing a philosophy of detachment. The ambitions and intrigues of society that had once consumed him now seemed as insubstantial as morning mist. In their place, he found solace in the simplicity of rural life and the quiet companionship of his sister Maria. Meanwhile, in the glittering salons of Moscow, Pierre Bezukhov was fighting battles of his own. The opulent surroundings of high society felt like a gilded cage, trapping him in a life that had become devoid of meaning. His marriage to the beautiful but cold Helene had soured into a bitter mockery of love, leaving him desperate for something more. It was in this state of desperation that Pierre turned to Freemasonry. The secretive nature of the organization appealed to his restless spirit, offering the promise of hidden truths and spiritual fulfillment. As he underwent the initiation rites, The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the hope that flickered to life in Pierre's heart. Inspired by his new beliefs, Pierre set out on a journey across the vast expanse of Russia. The countryside unfolded before him like a living tapestry, each new vista filling him with a sense of wonder and possibility. The crisp air of the open road invigorated him, carrying with it the scent of pine forests and wildflowers. With boundless optimism, Pierre launched into ambitious plans for education and agricultural reforms on his sprawling estates. But the path of change proved far rockier than he had anticipated. The entrenched feudal system resisted his efforts like a stubborn weed, its roots reaching deep into the very fabric of Russian society. Time and again, Pierre's idealistic reforms crumbled in the face of practical challenges. The gap between Masonic ideals and the harsh realities of Russian life widened, leaving him grappling with doubt and uncertainty. The organization that had once seemed to hold all the answers now left him with more questions than ever, each one weighing heavily on his conscience. Far from the philosophical struggles of Pierre, Nikolai Rostov found himself embracing the simple pleasures of country life at his family's estate, Otradno. The young soldier, fresh from the chaos of war, reveled in the peaceful rhythms of rural existence. The thrill of the hunt replaced the adrenaline of battle, the pounding of hooves and baying of hounds stirring his blood in a way that felt both familiar and new. As Nikolai reconnected with his roots, he became increasingly aware of a growing attraction to his cousin Sonia. Her gentle presence and quiet strength drew him like a moth to a flame. The soft curve of her smile and the warmth in her eyes awakened feelings in him that he had never experienced before. But even as his heart yearned for her, Nikolai found himself caught between the demands of love and the expectations of his family. The Rostovs' precarious financial situation cast a long shadow over any hopes of romance, adding yet another layer of complexity to Nikolai's emotional journey. As the sun began to set on another day at Otradnoe, casting long shadows across the fields, a messenger arrived at the estate. The Rostov family gathered around, their faces a mix of curiosity and excitement as they read the contents of the letter. Natasha's eyes sparkled with anticipation, her cheeks flushing with color as she realized what this meant. The family was to journey to Moscow, where Natasha would make her debut into high society at her very first grand ball. The news sent a ripple of excitement through the household, but for Nikolai it brought a sudden pang of uncertainty. As he watched Sonia's face fall slightly at the announcement, he felt torn between his growing feelings for her and the allure of the glittering world that awaited them in Moscow. What would this journey mean for their budding romance? And how would the bright lights of the city compare to the simple joys he had rediscovered in the countryside? As night fell and the Rostov family began their preparations for the upcoming trip, Nikolai found himself standing alone on the terrace, gazing out at the starlit sky. The future stretched before him, full of possibility and fraught with uncertainty. Little did he know that the journey to Moscow would set in motion events that would change not only his life, but the lives of all those around him, forever. The Rostov family set out on a journey to Moscow, their hearts brimming with anticipation. For Natasha, this trip held special significance. It marked her first grand ball and her debut into high society. The carriage wheels clattered against the cobblestones, each jolt sending a shiver of excitement through Natasha's body. She gazed out the window, drinking in the sights of the bustling city, her eyes wide with wonder. The air was thick with the scent of possibility, mingling with the earthy aroma of horses and the sweet perfume wafting from nearby bakeries. As they arrived at their temporary Moscow residence, Natasha's stomach fluttered with a mix of nerves and exhilaration. She ran her fingers over the soft silk of her new gown, marveling at how foreign it felt against her skin. The weight of expectation hung heavy in the air, almost tangible in the hushed whispers and meaningful glances exchanged between her parents. On the night of the ball, Natasha stood before her mirror, barely recognizing the young woman who stared back. Her dark curls were piled high atop her head, adorned with delicate pearl pins that caught the candlelight like tiny stars. With trembling fingers, she smoothed down her gown one last time, took a deep breath, and descended the stairs to join her family. The moment she stepped into the ballroom, Natasha felt as though she'd entered a different world. The space was a dazzling spectacle, a sea of swirling colors and glittering jewels. Chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the assembled nobility, their light dancing off polished marble floors. The air hummed with excitement, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. At first, Natasha felt overwhelmed, like a small boat tossed about in a vast ocean. The sheer opulence of it all threatened to swallow her whole. But as the music swelled and she took her first tentative steps onto the dance floor, something magical happened. Her natural vivacity took over, and soon she was twirling and laughing, her joy infectious to all around her. Across the room, Prince Andrei Bolkonsky stood in the shadows, his handsome face etched with melancholy. He had come only at the insistence of his friend Pierre, finding little pleasure in such gatherings. But as his eyes fell upon Natasha, something stirred within him. Her unbridled enthusiasm was like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds, piercing the gloom that had shrouded his heart for so long. As if drawn by an invisible thread, Andrei found himself moving towards her. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Natasha's eyes widened in surprise, then sparkled with delight as she accepted. Their waltz was nothing short of magical. As they moved together, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Natasha felt as light as air, carried along by Andrei's strong arms and the swell of the music. For Andrei, it was as if color had suddenly returned to a world that had long been gray. The warmth of Natasha's hand in his, the scent of her perfume, the sparkle in her eyes, all of it combined to awaken something he thought long dead within him. In the weeks that followed, Andrei found himself drawn to the Rostov home time and time again. He and Natasha would spend hours in conversation, their words flowing as easily as a summer breeze. They took long walks in the countryside, where the beauty of nature seemed to mirror the blossoming of their love. The gentle rustle of leaves, the soft chirping of birds, and the warm caress of the sun on their skin became the backdrop to their growing affection. Natasha's family watched this courtship with growing excitement. Her mother, in particular, could hardly contain her joy at the prospect of such a prestigious match. The wealthy and respected Prince Bolkonsky would be a catch indeed for their beloved Natasha. The air in the Rostov household crackled with anticipation, every visit from Andrei causing a flurry of activity and whispered conversations. As spring turned to summer, Andrei felt a change within himself. The weight of past sorrows began to lift, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and joy. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, he asked Natasha to be his wife. The moment was perfect. The soft glow of twilight, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers, and the look of pure love in Natasha's eyes as she said yes. Their happiness, however, was soon tempered by the disapproval of Andrei's father, the old Prince Nikolai Bolkonsky. The elder Bolkonsky, set in his ways and suspicious of change, insisted on a year-long engagement. It was a test, he thought, one that would surely end this ill-conceived match. His words fell like ice water on the warm glow of their engagement, introducing a note of discord into their harmony. With a heavy heart, Andrei agreed to his father's terms. He would travel abroad to recuperate, promising to return and make Natasha his bride when the year had passed. Their parting was bittersweet, filled with whispered promises and barely contained tears. The air was thick with unspoken words and the ache of impending separation. As Andrei's carriage disappeared into the distance, Natasha felt as if a part of her heart went with him. The coming months stretched before her like an endless desert, each day a test of her patience and fidelity. She clung to the memory of their time together, replaying every moment in her mind like a precious treasure. Unbeknownst to both Andrei and Natasha, their love had awakened feelings in another. Pierre Besakov, witness to their blossoming romance, found himself grappling with a growing affection for Natasha. Out of loyalty to his friend, he kept these feelings buried deep, adding yet another layer of complexity to the intricate web of relationships that surrounded them. His silent struggle was a storm brewing beneath the calm surface, threatening to upend the delicate balance of their world. As summer faded into autumn, Natasha faced the challenges of her new status as an engaged woman. She navigated the expectations of society like a tightrope walker, balancing the demands of propriety with her own evolving emotions. Each letter from Andrei was a lifeline, a reminder of the love that waited on the other side of their separation. Yet as the days grew shorter and colder, Natasha couldn't help but wonder what changes the coming year might bring. The crisp autumn air carried with it a sense of foreboding, a whisper of challenges yet to come. As Natasha stood by her window, watching the leaves fall in a cascade of red and gold, she felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the weather. A nagging doubt crept into her heart, planting seeds of uncertainty. Would Andrei's love remain as steadfast as he promised? Could their bond withstand the test of time and distance? As night fell, Natasha found herself staring into the darkness, her mind racing with questions that had no answers, unaware of the trials that lay ahead in the long, lonely months to come. Andrei's absence stretched on, leaving Natasha in a state of restless uncertainty. The long engagement weighed heavily on her heart, stirring a whirlpool of emotions within her young and passionate soul. As winter's icy grip loosened its hold on Moscow, the city awakened with a vibrant energy that seemed to mirror Natasha's restless spirit. The streets bustled with life, the air filled with the promise of new beginnings. For Natasha, each day without Andrei felt like an eternity, her heart aching for his return. The Rostov family's visit to the opera house offered a welcome distraction from her longing. As they approached the grand building, Natasha's breath caught in her throat. The opera house stood like a jewel against the darkening sky, its windows aglow with warm light. Inside, the air hummed with excitement, perfumed ladies fanning themselves as gentlemen in crisp uniforms strutted about. Natasha's eyes wandered, taking in the spectacle around her. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a magical glow on the sea of silk and velvet below. It was in this enchanted atmosphere that her gaze locked with that of Anatole Kuragin. Time seemed to stand still as their eyes met. Anatole, tall and dashing, with a smile that promised adventure, was the very picture of a romantic hero. His gaze, intense and unwavering, sent a shiver down Natasha's spine. In that moment, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in months. Little did Natasha know that Anatole harbored a dark secret, a clandestine marriage carefully hidden from society. Yet as he looked upon Natasha's fresh beauty and innocent charm, all thoughts of his existing commitments vanished like mist in the morning sun. Anatole's courtship was a whirlwind that swept Natasha off her feet. His words, honeyed and intoxicating, filled the void left by Andrei's absence. Each compliment, each stolen glance, each brush of his hand against hers sent Natasha's heart racing. She found herself drawn into Anatole's orbit, unable and unwilling to resist the pull of his charm. With each passing day, Natasha's resolve weakened. The memory of Andrei, once so vivid, began to fade like a dream upon waking. Anatole's sister, the cunning Helene, fanned the flames of this illicit romance. Her words were poison wrapped in silk, weaving a web of deceit around the unsuspecting Natasha. In hushed whispers and furtive glances, a plan for elopement took shape. The promise of a life filled with passion and adventure beckoned to Natasha, tempting her away from the path she had once been so certain of. On the night of the planned elopement, Natasha's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The air felt electric, charged with the potential for both ecstasy and disaster. As she prepared to leave everything behind, fate intervened in the form of her cousin Sonia. The truth hit like a thunderbolt, shattering the carefully constructed illusion. Sonia's words, filled with concern and horror, cut through the fog of Natasha's infatuation. The revelation of Anatole's existing marriage was a dagger to her heart, each word twisting the blade deeper. Maria Dmitrievna, a force of nature in her own right, swept in like an avenging angel. Her fierce determination and quick thinking prevented a scandal that would have ruined Natasha forever. The truth of Anatole's deception came to light, each revelation more painful than the last. The aftermath was a maelstrom of emotions. Natasha's world crumbled around her, the pieces of her shattered dreams cutting deep. When news reached Prince Andrei, his return to Moscow brought not reconciliation, but a cold, unforgiving rejection that froze Natasha's very soul. Despair settled over Natasha like a heavy cloak, suffocating her once vibrant spirit. In a moment of utter hopelessness, she reached for poison, seeking an escape from the pain that threatened to consume her. It was only through the swift action of those around her that tragedy was averted. Throughout this tumultuous time, Pierre Bezukhov stood as a pillar of support for the Rostov family. His confrontation with Anatole was a quiet storm, his usually gentle demeanor giving way to a fierce protectiveness. With carefully chosen words and thinly veiled threats, Pierre ensured Anatole's hasty departure from Moscow. As Pierre comforted Natasha in the wake of the scandal, something shifted within him. The realization of his own love for her bloomed like a flower in spring, but he kept this revelation locked away, a secret too precious and too dangerous to share. The ripples of this ill-fated romance spread far and wide through Moscow society. Natasha's reputation lay in tatters, her engagement to Andrei irrevocably broken. The once bright future now seemed shrouded in uncertainty, leaving all those involved to grapple with the consequences of passion, betrayal, and the fickle nature of the human heart. As the dust began to settle on this personal tragedy, a new tension gripped the air. Whispers of war began to circulate through the streets of Moscow. Soldiers marched with increasing frequency, their boots echoing on the cobblestones. In the distance, beyond the borders of Russia, a storm was brewing. Napoleon's shadow loomed large, threatening to engulf everything in its path. Little did they know that their world was about to change forever, as the largest army Europe had ever seen prepared to cross into Russian territory. In June 1812, Napoleon's massive invasion of Russia began. His army of over 600,000 men, the largest European military force ever assembled to that point, crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory. The news spread like wildfire across the vast country, igniting a blaze of patriotic fervor that united nobles and peasants alike. The air buzzed with a mix of fear and determination, like a beehive disturbed by an approaching storm. Moscow, the beating heart of Russia, pulsed with tension. The cobblestone streets echoed with the hurried footsteps of citizens rushing to and fro, their faces etched with worry. Pierre Bezukhov found himself swept up in a heated meeting, the crowd's energy electric and palpable. Count Fyodor Rostopchin, the city's governor, stood before them, his face flushed with passion as he delivered fiery speeches against the French. "We will not bow to these invaders." Rostopchin's voice boomed, his words like sparks igniting the already smoldering anti-French sentiment. "Every Russian must stand ready to defend our motherland." The crowd roared in approval, but Pierre noticed a flicker of doubt in Rostopchin's eyes. It was gone in an instant, masked by renewed vigor as the governor continued his impassioned plea. Outside, the city streets teemed with activity. Young men, their eyes bright with dreams of glory, rushed to enlist. Families huddled in hushed conversations, weighing the heart-wrenching decision to flee or stand their ground. The very fabric of Moscow seemed to quiver with anticipation and dread. In the countryside, Prince Andrei Bolkonsky sought solace in the chaos of war. The memory of his broken engagement with Natasha still stung, a wound that refused to heal. Despite his father's vehement objections, which echoed through the halls of their estate like thunder, Andrei made his decision. "I must go, father," he said, his voice steady but his heart racing. "I cannot sit idly by while our country is threatened." Assigned to the headquarters of General Barclay de Tolly, Andrei found himself in a world of strategy and politics. The cautious commander-in-chief's approach grated on his nerves. He watched, frustration building like pressure in a steam engine, as inefficiency and political maneuvering plagued the high command. "We should be advancing, not retreating," Andrei muttered to himself, his fists clenched at his sides. He longed for action, for the clarity of purpose that only the front lines could provide. Meanwhile, Nikolai Rostov, now a battle-hardened hussar, found himself torn between two worlds. The call of duty pulled him towards the impending conflict, but the tendrils of his family's financial woes reached out to him like desperate hands. The Rostovs, once secure in their Moscow estate, now faced the gut-wrenching prospect of abandonment. "We cannot leave," his mother pleaded, her eyes brimming with tears. "This is our home, our life." Nikolai's heart ached as he looked around the familiar rooms, now shadowed by the looming threat of invasion. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than any armor he had ever worn. Back in Moscow, Pierre felt useless. a fifth wheel in a city preparing for war. A restless energy consumed him, driving him to action. He made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He would travel to the front lines to witness the conflict with his own eyes. But as he prepared for his journey, a grandiose idea took root in his mind. It grew like a weed, overshadowing all reason until it became an obsession. He convinced himself, with the fervor of a man possessed, that he was destined to assassinate Napoleon. "It must be me," Pierre whispered to his reflection as he donned peasant clothes, his noble bearing hidden beneath rough fabric. "I will end this war before it destroys everything we hold dear." With a mix of determination and naivety, Pierre set out towards the advancing French army. His heart pounded with equal parts fear and excitement as he left the familiar streets of Moscow behind. As Pierre embarked on his foolhardy quest, the French forces pushed deeper into Russian territory. They left destruction in their wake, fields of wheat reduced to ash, villages emptied of life. The very land seemed to cry out in anguish, sacrificed to slow the invaders' advance. In response, the Russian army under General Kutuzov adopted a strategy of continuous retreat. Like a matador drawing a bull, they lured Napoleon deeper into the vast Russian interior, stretching his supply lines to the breaking point. It was a game of patience and endurance, with the fate of a nation hanging in the balance. The tension mounted with each passing day, each mile of Russian soil ceded to the invader. Moscow, the heart of Russia, trembled on the brink of an uncertain future. Yet in the face of this existential threat, the Russian people found reserves of strength they never knew they possessed. From the humblest peasant to the most decorated general, a steely resolve took hold. As the decisive confrontation drew near, the Russian army and people steeled themselves for the battle that would determine the future of their nation. The air was thick with anticipation, the calm before a storm that would reshape the course of history. In the distance, the rumble of cannon fire grew louder. Napoleon's forces were advancing deeper into Russia, their sights set on the heart of the nation. The Russian army, under the command of General Kutuzov, braced themselves for what they knew would be a decisive battle. As night fell, the flickering campfires of both armies could be seen stretching across the horizon, a testament to the massive scale of the coming conflict. In the eerie calm before the storm, one question hung in the air. Would the fields near the small village of Borodino become the stage for Russia's last stand? Napoleon's forces were advancing deeper into Russia, their sights set on the heart of the nation. The Russian army, under the command of General Kutuzov, braced themselves for a decisive battle near the village of Borodino, a mere 70 miles west of Moscow. The air crackled with tension as two massive armies faced each other across the battlefield on September 7, 1812. Russian soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces etched with grim determination, ready to defend their beloved Moscow. As night fell, a somber mood settled over the camp like a thick, suffocating blanket. Prince Andrei found himself lost in a sea of thoughts, the weight of his mortality pressing down on him like a physical burden. He gazed up at the vast expanse of stars, each twinkling light a painful reminder of his now distant and unreachable ambitions. It was in this contemplative state that Pierre found him. Pierre, driven by a misguided quest to assassinate Napoleon, had stumbled into the camp earlier that day. His round face was flushed with a mix of excitement and fear, a stark contrast to Andrei's calm demeanor. As they talked, their conversation deepened, touching on the very essence of war, life, and death. "What do you think it all means, Andrei?" Pierre asked, his voice barely above a whisper, carried away by the cool night breeze. "All this fighting? All this death?" Andrei's eyes, once filled with dreams of glory, now held a wisdom born of suffering. He sighed deeply before responding. "I used to think I knew, Pierre. Now I'm not so sure of anything." Their words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their shared experiences. Around them, the camp buzzed with the nervous energy of soldiers preparing for battle. The clinking of weapons, the murmur of hushed conversations, and the occasional neighing of horses created a symphony of impending conflict. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, the peaceful night gave way to chaos. The air erupted with a thunderous roar of artillery as both armies, numbering around 250,000 men combined, unleashed massive barrages. The earth shook violently, and the sky filled with thick plumes of smoke and bursts of fire. Pierre, conspicuous in his white hat and frock coat, found himself wandering the battlefield in a daze. The sights and sounds around him seemed almost unreal. Men falling like toy soldiers, their cries of pain drowned out by the constant barrage of gunfire. The air was thick with gunpowder and the metallic scent of blood, making it hard to breathe. Time and again, death brushed past Pierre like a cold wind. A cannonball whistled by, missing him by inches, the rush of air making his heart skip a beat. He stumbled over bodies, his once pristine white coat now stained with mud and blood. In a surreal turn of events, he found himself assisting the Russian artillery crews, his hands moving almost of their own accord as he helped load and fire the massive guns. As Pierre grappled with the chaos around him, Prince Andrei led his regiment into the fray. The battle swirled around him like a maelstrom, but Andrei moved with purpose, his sword flashing in the sunlight like a beacon of hope. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The world exploded in a blinding flash as a shell burst nearby, and Andrei felt himself falling into an abyss of darkness. Lying on the field, drifting in and out of consciousness, Andrei experienced a profound shift in his understanding. The pain in his body seemed to fade away as his mind expanded, touching on something greater than himself. In that moment, individual glory and ambition seemed as insignificant as grains of sand on a vast beach. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by an almost peaceful silence. The battle raged on, a titanic struggle that saw no clear victor. Key positions changed hands multiple times, the ground soaked with the blood of both armies. The Revsky Redoubt and the Bagration Flaisches became graveyards where men fought and died for mere yards of earth. The air was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the metallic tang of blood, and the heart-wrenching cries of the wounded and dying. As night fell, an eerie quiet settled over the battlefield. Where once there had been the thunder of guns and the cries of men, now there was only the moaning of the wounded and the soft weeping of the survivors. The field was a sea of bodies, with over 70,000 casualties from both sides. The once lush grass was now trampled and stained dark with blood, littered with broken weapons and shattered dreams. In the aftermath, both armies claimed victory, but the truth was far less clear. The Russian army, battered and bloodied, was forced to retreat. General Kutuzov, his face lined with the weight of his decision, gave the order to fall back, leaving the road to Moscow open. As he watched his troops march away from the field of Borodino, Kutuzov knew that this battle, while not stopping Napoleon's advance, had changed the course of the war. The French army, though victorious, had been severely weakened. In saving his army, Kutuzov had set the stage for the eventual destruction of Napoleon's forces. The Battle of Borodino, with its enormous cost in lives and its strategic implications, would prove to be a turning point. As the Russian army retreated, they carried with them the seeds of Napoleon's eventual defeat, a defeat that would begin in the burning streets of Moscow and end in the frozen wastes of the Russian winter. As the last of the Russian troops disappeared into the distance, a chill wind swept across the battlefield, carrying with it the scent of smoke and the promise of change. The French army, battered but unbowed, turned their gaze towards Moscow. Little did they know that their greatest challenge lay not in conquest, but in survival. For as they marched relentlessly towards the heart of Russia, an air of impending doom settled over Moscow like a heavy fog, waiting to engulf them in its icy embrace. The French army marched relentlessly towards Moscow in September 1812. As they approached, an air of impending doom settled over the city like a heavy fog. The once bustling streets of Moscow now echoed with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional creak of a shutter or the distant bark of an abandoned dog. Dust swirled in the autumn breeze, dancing through empty marketplaces where just days ago vendors had hawked their wares to eager crowds. Now the city held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. In the Rostov household, chaos reigned. The air was thick with fear and indecision as the family scrambled to pack their belongings. Natasha, her dark eyes wide with panic, darted from room to room, her hands trembling as she grabbed at precious mementos and practical necessities alike. The floor was a maze of open trunks and scattered possessions, a visual representation of their shattered lives. What do we take? What do we leave? Natasha's voice cracked as she held up a delicate porcelain figurine, a cherished gift from her father. Her mother, face lined with worry, could only shake her head helplessly. Amidst the frenzied packing, a moment of profound nobility emerged. Count Rostov, his usually jovial face etched with grim determination, made an announcement that silenced the room. "We will use our carts to transport wounded soldiers," he declared, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "Our possessions can be replaced. These men's lives cannot." The family stood in stunned silence, the magnitude of the sacrifice sinking in. For a moment the chaos stilled, replaced by a shared look of understanding and resolve. This decision would echo through their lives, threatening their already precarious financial situation, but in that moment, it felt unquestionably right. Among the wounded they took was the dying Prince Andrei. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of irony. As they carefully loaded him onto the cart, Natasha remained oblivious to his presence, her heart still heavy with the guilt of their broken engagement. The weight of her past choices hung around her neck like a millstone, threatening to drag her under. Meanwhile, Pierre Bezukhov had returned to Moscow, his mind a tumultuous sea of conflicting emotions. The horrors he had witnessed at Borodino played on repeat in his mind's eye. The thunderous roar of cannons, the agonized screams of the dying, the sickening smell of gunpowder and blood. Yet as others fled the city in droves, Pierre felt compelled to stay. A strange, almost feverish energy had taken hold of him. In his mind, a grandiose plan began to take shape. He would assassinate Napoleon himself. The idea, born of equal parts desperation and misplaced heroism, consumed him entirely. On September 14th, Pierre stood witness to a scene that would be seared into his memory forever. Napoleon entered the abandoned city. His triumphant march met not with formal surrender or cheering crowds, but with a deafening, oppressive silence. Pierre watched from the shadows as the French emperor's expectant face slowly morphed into confusion, then anger, as the reality of his hollow victory sank in. As night fell, Moscow took on an otherworldly glow. The first fires, likely set by Russian patriots determined to deny the French their prize, began as small pinpricks of orange in the gathering darkness. But fanned by strong winds, they soon grew into a ravenous inferno that devoured the city with terrifying speed. Pierre wandered the burning streets in a daze. The world around him transformed into a hellish landscape. The heat was oppressive, searing his lungs with every breath. Ash rained down like black snow, coating everything in a layer of gritty despair. The roar of the flames was punctuated by the crash of collapsing buildings and the distant, desperate screams of those trapped in the inferno. Through the chaos, Pierre found unexpected moments of heroism. He pulled a crying child from a collapsing building, the heat blistering his skin as he shielded the little one from falling debris. Later, he intervened to prevent a French soldier from assaulting a young woman, his usually gentle nature giving way to a fierce protectiveness. These small acts gave Pierre a sense of purpose amidst the madness, but they also drew unwanted attention. The French occupation quickly descended into a frenzy of looting and disorder. Soldiers, drunk on victory and fear, pillaged abandoned homes and churches. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood mixed with distant screams and the ever-present roar of the fire. Pierre moved through the burning city like a ghost, his clothes singed, his face blackened with soot. His erratic behavior and presence in restricted areas soon caught the eye of French authorities. As the fires raged on, turning night into day, Pierre was arrested on suspicion of arson and espionage. He offered no resistance as he was led away, his mind still struggling to process the apocalyptic scene around him. As he was marched through the streets, Pierre watched Moscow burn, the once grand city crumbling to ashes in a final, defiant act against the invaders. The destruction of Moscow marked a turning point in the war, depriving Napoleon of his expected prize and setting the stage for the disastrous French retreat that would follow. For Pierre and the others caught in this historical maelstrom, the burning of Moscow represented a cataclysmic event that would forever alter the course of their lives. As the last embers of the Great Fire began to die out, a new threat loomed on the horizon. The air grew colder, carrying with it the first whispers of the harsh Russian winter. Pierre, now a prisoner of the French, looked out from his cell window at the devastated city. In the distance, he could see the first snowflakes beginning to fall, a harbinger of the brutal months to come. He shivered, not just from the cold, but from the realization that the true test of survival was only just beginning. Moscow lay in ruins, a smoldering testament to the cost of war. As winter's icy fingers crept across the land, the once proud city stood as a silent witness to the devastation that had befallen it. Napoleon, his face etched with lines of worry and defeat, reluctantly ordered his troops to retreat from Russia in October 1812. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and despair as the Grande Armée, now a mere shadow of its former glory, began its long march home. Pierre Bezukhov trudged alongside the retreating army, a prisoner in tattered clothes. His feet, blistered and bleeding, crunched through the snow with each painful step. The bitter wind howled around him, carrying the distant cries of Russian partisans and Cossacks. Pierre's stomach gnawed with hunger, a constant reminder of their dwindling supplies. In this frozen hell, Pierre found an unexpected ray of hope in Platon Karatayev. The peasant soldier's weathered face seemed to glow with an inner warmth that defied the harsh conditions. As they huddled together for warmth, Platon's words flowed like honey, sweet and nourishing to Pierre's weary soul. "Life, my friend," Platon would say, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air, "is like this march. We don't choose where it leads us, but we can choose how we walk the path." His simple wisdom, born from a lifetime of hardship, began to take root in Pierre's heart, challenging the beliefs he had held so dear before the war. The retreat quickly descended into chaos. Once proud soldiers fought like animals over scraps of moldy bread. Weapons lay abandoned in the snow, traded for the slim chance of survival. Pierre watched this disintegration with a mixture of horror and fascination, his mind reeling at how quickly civilization could crumble. Death became a constant companion, lurking in the biting cold that numbed limbs and froze lungs. It stalked in the gnawing hunger that turned stomachs to lead. Pierre himself danced on the edge of oblivion when he faced a French firing squad, accused of spying. As he stared down the cold muzzles of the muskets, a strange calm washed over him. Platon's words echoed in his mind, and he found himself ready to embrace whatever came next. Fate intervened in a whirlwind of shouts and gunfire. Pierre found himself swept up in a partisan raid led by familiar faces. Dolokhov and Denisov, men he had once considered enemies. The irony of being saved by former adversaries was not lost on Pierre, a stark reminder of how the war had redrawn the lines of allegiance. But freedom came at a terrible cost. In the chaos of the raid, Platon Karatayev fell, his simple wisdom silenced forever. Pierre cradled his friend's body, feeling as if a light had gone out in the world. Platon's death crystallized the transformation that had been taking place within Pierre. The man who emerged from captivity was not the same one who had entered it. As Pierre journeyed on with his liberators, he found himself viewing the world through new eyes. The simple act of breathing free air became a joy. The warmth of a campfire, the taste of unspoiled food, these small pleasures took on an almost sacred quality. The retreat from Moscow continued, a grim procession that seemed to stretch into eternity. What had begun as an army of over 600,000 men dwindled to a mere 30,000 ragged survivors by the time they recrossed the Niemen River in December. The once unstoppable force that had swept into Russia now limped home, broken and humbled. As Pierre watched the last of Napoleon's army disappear across the border, he realized that he too had crossed a threshold. The hardships he had endured, the wisdom he had gained, and the losses he had suffered had forged him anew. He stood on the cusp of a new era, not just for himself, but for all of Europe. Pierre turned his gaze towards Moscow, his heart heavy with the weight of all he had experienced. As he took his first steps back toward the city he once called home, a flicker of movement caught his eye. In the distance, he saw figures emerging from the ruins, like ghosts rising from the ashes. With a start, he realized these were not spirits, but the scattered members of Russian high society, slowly returning to survey the wreckage of their former lives. Pierre's pulse quickened as he wondered, in this new world forged by fire and ice, what would remain of the life he once knew? The scattered members of Russian high society began to reunite in the wake of the French retreat. They surveyed the wreckage of their former lives, grappling with the profound changes wrought by the war. In Yaroslavl, the Rostov family huddled together in a modest dwelling, a far cry from their once grand Moscow estate. The air hung heavy with the acrid scent of uncertainty, mingling with the bitter taste of financial ruin that seemed to coat their tongues. Natasha, her eyes sunken and hollow from months of emotional turmoil, found herself drawn to the makeshift hospitals that dotted the city like wounds on its landscape. The cries of wounded soldiers echoed through the corridors, a haunting melody that both repelled and called to her. As she moved among the rows of injured men, her once delicate hands now calloused from work, Natasha felt a spark of purpose ignite within her. Each bandage she wrapped, each fever she soothed, seemed to mend a small piece of her fractured spirit. Fate, however, had one more cruel twist in store. In a heart-stopping moment, Natasha's eyes met those of Prince Andrei across the room. He lay dying in the very same house where she volunteered, a cruel irony that seemed to mock their shared history. Time stood still as the weight of their past pressed down upon them, the air between them crackling with unspoken words. With trembling steps, Natasha approached his bedside. The once proud prince was now a shadow of his former self, his skin pale as parchment, stretched taut over sharp bones. Her hands shook as she began to care for him, each gentle touch a silent plea for forgiveness. As days melted into nights, a fragile peace settled between them. Andrei's anger and hurt dissolved like morning mist, replaced by a profound acceptance that seemed to radiate from his very being. Natasha's guilt transformed, blossoming into a deep, abiding love that transcended their tumultuous past. "Forgive me," Natasha whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of bedsheets and the labored breathing of the dying man before her. Andrei's eyes, though clouded with pain, held a warmth that spoke volumes. "There is nothing to forgive," he murmured, his hand weakly grasping hers, a final connection in the face of eternity. In those precious, fleeting moments, they found a connection that defied words, as if their souls had finally aligned after years of misalignment. When Andrei finally slipped away, it was with a sense of completion, as if the jagged edges of his life had at last been smoothed by the gentle hands of love and forgiveness. The prince's death cast a long shadow over both Natasha and his sister Maria, enveloping them in a shared grief that seemed to dim the very sun. In their sorrow, they found an unexpected kinship, a bridge built over the chasm of loss. Late into the night, they would sit together, their quiet conversations a balm for their wounded hearts, each word a stitch in the tapestry of healing. Meanwhile, Pierre Bezukov's journey back to Moscow unfolded like a fever dream, an odyssey of self-discovery through a landscape scarred by war. The once soft nobleman had been forged anew in the crucible of captivity. His clothes hung in tatters, his beard grew wild and unkempt, but his eyes held a newfound clarity, as if he had peered into the very heart of existence and emerged transformed. As he trudged along war-torn roads, the rhythmic crunch of gravel under his feet a constant companion, Pierre's mind wandered to Helene, the wife he had left behind. The news of her death, delivered by a fellow traveler with casual cruelty, hit him like a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs. Yet as the initial shock subsided, he felt the heavy chains of his unhappy marriage fall away, link by rusted link. For the first time in years, Pierre tasted true freedom, its flavor both exhilarating and terrifying. Moscow, when Pierre finally reached it, was a city reborn from ashes, like a phoenix rising with tattered wings. The acrid smell of smoke still lingered in the air, but so too did the unmistakable scent of hope, as fresh and green as new leaves after a long winter. Amidst the rubble, people scurried about like ants rebuilding a destroyed hill, their faces set with grim determination as they began the monumental task of reconstruction. It was in this atmosphere of renewal that Pierre and Natasha's paths crossed once more. Their eyes met across a crowded street, and in that instant, a spark of recognition flared into something deeper, a connection that seemed to transcend time and space. They came together like two halves of a whole, their shared experiences of suffering and growth forming an unbreakable bond. As they walked arm in arm through the slowly recovering city, Pierre marveled at the change in Natasha. Gone was the flighty girl of years past, replaced by a woman of quiet strength and grace, her eyes holding depths of wisdom beyond her years. For her part, Natasha saw in Pierre a steadiness and purpose that both intrigued and comforted her, like a rock in the stormy sea of their new reality. The Rostov family, once the toast of Moscow society, now faced the harsh reality of their reduced circumstances with a mixture of despair and unexpected resilience. Count Rostov, his jovial face now lined with worry, pored over ledgers late into the night, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows as he searched for a way out of their financial quagmire. Countess Rostova, surprising everyone including herself, rose to the challenge with unexpected strength. Her gentle hands, once adorned with jewels, now scrubbed floors with quiet dignity, each stroke a testament to her unwavering love for her family. Nikolai Rostov felt the weight of his family's expectations like a physical burden, pressing down on his shoulders with each passing day. The dashing young officer now found himself torn between duty and desire, his heart a battlefield where love and obligation waged a constant war. The thought of marrying for money to save his family gnawed at him like a hungry wolf. Even as his heart yearned for the penniless Sonia, her gentle smile a beacon in the darkness of his doubts. Princess Maria Bolkonskaya, now mistress of a vast fortune, stood at a crossroads, her future stretching before her like an uncharted sea. The loss of her father and brother had left her adrift, yet the very independence she had long craved now seemed a daunting prospect, its freedom tinged with loneliness. As she walked through the halls of her ancestral home, Maria's footsteps echoed with possibility and trepidation in equal measure, each step a choice between the comfort of the past and the uncertainty of the future. As these lives intersected and diverged, a common thread began to emerge, weaving them together in a tapestry of shared experience. Each person, touched by the fires of war and personal tragedy, embarked on a journey of healing and self-discovery. The Moscow they knew was gone, reduced to ashes and memories, but from its ruins, a new world was taking shape, one forged by the indomitable spirit of those who had endured and survived. As the sun set on this chapter of their lives, casting long shadows across the rebuilding city, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. The war might have ended, but for these survivors, a new battle was just beginning, the fight to reclaim their lives and find meaning in a world forever changed. Little did they know that as they stood on the precipice of this new era, fate had one more surprise in store, a twist that would once again test their resilience and redefine their understanding of victory and defeat. The war had come to an end, marking Napoleon's defeat and ushering in a new era for Russia. Survivors, their lives forever altered, began the arduous task of rebuilding in a country transformed by conflict. Pierre Bezukhov stood at the window of his Moscow estate, his breath fogging the glass as he gazed out at the city slowly coming back to life. The air was crisp with the promise of renewal, yet tinged with the lingering scent of smoke and decay. Scars of war were etched into the landscape like deep furrows in a farmer's field, but so too were the green shoots of hope sprouting amidst the rubble. As he watched people bustling in the streets below, their voices a distant hum of life returning, Pierre felt a profound change within himself. The hardships he had endured during the war had stripped away his youthful naivety like bark peeled from a tree, leaving behind the solid, weathered core of hard-won wisdom and purpose. His thoughts, as they often did these days, turned to Natasha. The memory of her face, her laughter, her spirit, filled him with a warmth that seemed to push back the lingering chill of wartime. Their shared experiences, though often painful, had forged a connection between them that Pierre knew was unbreakable, like steel tempered in fire. With a deep breath that seemed to fill his entire being, he made a decision. It was time to act on the love that had only grown stronger through the trials they had faced. The courtship that followed was like a delicate dance, each step carefully considered. Pierre and Natasha moved towards each other with a new understanding, their past traumas serving not as barriers but as bridges. They found solace in each other's company, their conversations deep and meaningful, often lasting long into the night, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared glances that spoke volumes. On a crisp autumn day, with leaves of gold and crimson swirling around them like nature's confetti, Pierre and Natasha were married. The ceremony was intimate, a stark contrast to the grand affairs of their past. As they exchanged vows, the look that passed between them spoke of a love tempered by hardship and strengthened by shared understanding. A silent promise more binding than any words could express. Their life together unfolded like a flower opening to the sun, each day bringing new joys and challenges. They built a home filled with warmth and laughter, the patter of children's feet soon echoing through the halls like a sweet melody. Pierre found himself marveling at the simple joys of family life, his philosophical musings now grounded in the practical realities of fatherhood, changing diapers and soothing nighttime fears with equal dedication. Meanwhile, Nikolai Rostov faced his own crossroads, the weight of family responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The Rostov family fortunes, depleted by war, hung in the balance like a sword of Damocles. The path of least resistance led to Yulia Karagina, a wealthy heiress whose hand in marriage would solve his financial woes at a stroke. But Nikolai's heart pulled him in another direction, a compass needle stubbornly pointing towards true north. In a moment of clarity, standing in the fading light of a summer evening, the air thick with the scent of blooming lilacs, Nikolai made his choice. He broke his promise to Julie, his heart racing as he rode to the Bolkonsky estate, hooves thundering in time with his pulse. There he found Maria, Andrei's sister, her quiet strength a balm to his troubled soul. Nikolai's proposal to Maria was not the stuff of romantic fairy tales. Instead, it was honest, heartfelt, and tinged with the practical concerns that weighed on both their minds. Maria's vast inheritance, combined with Nikolai's determination and newfound maturity, offered hope for both their families' futures, a lifeline in uncertain times. Their wedding was a symbol of new beginnings, two great families united in purpose. Nikolai threw himself into the management of their combined estates with the same fervor he had once reserved for military campaigns. Under his guidance, both the Rostov and Bolkonsky lands flourished, debts were paid, and prosperity slowly returned, like spring after a long, harsh winter. In the midst of this new chapter, Sonia found herself navigating unfamiliar waters. Her world shifted on its axis. Her love for Nikolai, once the guiding star of her life, now had to be reshaped into something new. With grace and quiet dignity, she carved out a place for herself in the household, her devotion to family unwavering. Her days were filled with the satisfaction of supporting Nikolai and Maria, finding purpose in the myriad tasks that kept their home running smoothly, her selflessness a testament to her strength of character. Natasha's transformation was perhaps the most profound of all, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. The passionate, impulsive girl who had once scandalized society now channeled all her energy into her roles as wife and mother. She approached parenthood with the same intensity that had characterized her youth, finding deep fulfillment in the daily rhythms of family life, her love for her children a fierce and protective force. As the years passed, the wounds of war slowly healed, though their scars remained, a constant reminder of all they had endured. The epilogue of their story, set in 1820, found Pierre and Natasha's family thriving. Their home buzzed with the energy of growing children, their love for each other a steady flame that had only grown stronger with time, weathering all storms. Yet even in this period of peace, change was on the horizon, a distant rumble of thunder in clear skies. Pierre, his mind ever active, became involved in a secret society that opposed the government. His clandestine meetings and hushed conversations hinted at the political upheavals that lay in Russia's future, a reminder that the wheel of history never stops turning. In contrast, the Rostov-Bolkonsky household stood as a bastion of stability. Under Nikolai and Maria's careful stewardship, it had become a haven of warmth and comfort, a place where the uncertainties of the outside world seemed to fade away, like shadows banished by candlelight. As a new generation grew, learning to navigate the world their parents had fought to preserve, the cycle of life continued. The experiences of war had left an indelible mark on all their lives, shaping their choices and their understanding of the world, a legacy both bitter and sweet. In quiet moments, when the bustle of daily life subsided, They would sometimes reflect on the tumultuous years that had brought them to this point. They marveled at the twists of fate, the small decisions and chance encounters that had altered the course of their lives so profoundly, like pebbles causing ripples in a vast pond. And as they watched their children play, full of the same hopes and dreams they had once held, they understood that their story was but a small thread in the vast tapestry of human experience. Yet it was a thread that shimmered with love, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit to find meaning and joy, even in the face of history's greatest challenges. Their legacy, they realized, was not in grand gestures or heroic deeds, but in the quiet strength of family, the bonds of love that endure through all trials, and the hope they passed on to future generations. As the sun set on this chapter of their lives, casting long shadows across the land they had fought for and rebuilt, they faced the future with a quiet confidence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their shared experiences a foundation as solid as the Russian earth beneath their feet. And in that knowledge, they found peace.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.